Hello, Isaac.
Hello, Rabbi. Good morning. It's great to see you.
Good to see you. It's always exciting to start a new section. I feel like we just finished the questions about fasting.
Uh-huh.
And since then, I've taken upon myself to fast 24/7, 365 days a year as the Pharisee of the group. I just want to live up to the historical precedent that is charged of us that we fast a lot. I wouldn't want to miss that opportunity. But you don't bother fasting ever. You're fine.
Don't
It's
bother
always so.
fasting ever. I'm also excited. So each time we turn the page, like each time we move to a new section, it's like turning a page and different things stand out and we get these new insights. And I've enjoyed the journey so far, the journey where um, each passage brings a different highlights, and some are vague, some are ambiguous. But today, it'll be different from the ones you've read before. So
Okay,
maybe
and
on
so
that
we're going to
note,
start the beginning of a story, and we're only going to do the first verse, so we're not going to get so much into the story, but I feel like we'll get the first piece of the story.
mhm. Well, on that note, the Gospel according to Matthew, chapter 9, verse 18. While he was saying these things to them, behold, a ruler came in and knelt before him, saying, My daughter has just died. But come and lay your hand on her, and she will live.
Okay, so just to start, we should note that there are gospel parallels over here, and I just want to note because a lot of times these are actually minimal differences and large differences. So a lot of times people will call this story Jairus' daughter, but I'm sure you noticed there not only is there's not a name in here, but we also just hear that he's a leader of the synagogue. If you look in most Greek manuscripts, it doesn't even say leader of a synagogue. It just says he's a ruler. He's an important person. It could be leader of a synagogue and ruler are synonyms. But when you look in Mark 5:21, you get a very similar but different story when Jesus had crossed again in the boat to the other side. You know, Jesus is going across the Sea of Galilee left and right, Capernaum back and forth. Okay. Then one in verse 22 of Mark, one of the leaders of the synagogue, and this is why I think it says leader synagogue, named Jairus came and said, he fell at his feet, he begged, my daughter's at the point of my little daughter is at the point of death. So a lot of commentators also don't know if she is literally dead right now, because he does bring her back to life, and I would personally have no problem saying they bring dead people back to life, but it's unclear when you look at that story from that perspective. And when you look at Luke in 840, it adds he had only a daughter, very special. She was about 12 years old and she was dying. So when we look at the gospel parallels, I just want to note, A, we don't know if who the person was, but we know he's important. We don't know where this is taking place, which is always a common problem. And when you look in Matthew, you seem to have this sense while he was saying these things, there's almost like the sense that Jesus is going from thing to thing. There's almost that there's activity, there's this hyperness that he didn't even finish telling these fasting stories, these three fasting similitudes. And already, while he was still saying these things, there's some guy running up to him. It's almost like part two is the continuation is before part one is over. While when you look in Mark and Luke, you do have a sense that he is coming back across the water, the crowds are waiting for him. There's a more calmness to him. He's not running from story to story, as it were.
Yeah, so let's kind of unpack that a bit, right? So we said, we don't know is he exactly Jairus, kind of where this happened, but what we know is he ran and he knelt down. And I find this bizarre, right? So the way this is framed, he was talking to them, there are people around him, and this guy is just, so when there are people around him, like it's not like there are people surrounding Jesus all around. And this guy can just zoom in, push people out, come and kneel before, come and kind of
You know,
kneel,
he's an important guy. That's what
kneel.
important people do.
Yeah, so kind of could you unpack that a bit, right? So here's a guy, so here's Jesus surrounded by people, assuming surrounded by people, and some guy comes, he kneels down. Was he strong enough to push all the others, or was there an act of deference when people saw him, they just moved away?
Well, don't
And
forget,
then,
I mean, I don't
yeah,
know. Listen, it depends on how you look at it. When you look at the Matthean story, he's only talking to the disciples of John and those Pharisees. So it's not necessarily a lot of people. Only once you go to Mark and Luke, where Mark it says that there was a great crowd gathered around him and he was by the sea. Then one of later leaders came in. And we look at Luke, it says similarly, just then there came a man named and he fell at his feet. So I don't think he had to push his way through. There's no sense of that kind of crowd of violence that he can't get through. But I think that we see that there's two different ways of looking at it. One is the Matthew way, that there's a small group and we're jumping from story to story, just like we see in the very next story that starts in Matthew 9:71. As Jesus went on from there, two blind men, and the story right before this, 9:14, then the disciples of John came to him. Like there's always like a running commentary, like it's never stopping, that we don't see in Mark and Luke. But I'm not sure how difficult it would have been. You want to say like he's pushing the crowds, getting through it. It just seems that Jesus was, at least at this point, open to people accessing him. And that doesn't seem to be most complicated thing, that
Yeah,
people were able to get by his side and do things. And if anything, the verse 19, which we're not gonna like, we could just see it right now, and Jesus got up and followed him with his disciples. So the guy's like, "Oh, I need you." He's like, "Okay, sounds good.
okay.
I'm
So kind of
gonna go where I'm needed."
yeah. So before we go there, to your point, there were some people. It's not a whole lot, probably not a big crowd, but there's some disciples and the Pharisees around. Um, and so he was able to make his way through them. He comes, he kneels down. But kneeling down, I would imagine, is an act of deference, of deferring to the other. And I would imagine, is it fair to say that the folks will have been surprised, as in, wow, you're a ruler of the synagogue, or you're a ruler of the temple, and you're kneeling down to this guy? Because at this time, if the Pharisees and John's disciples were here, they were skeptical of Jesus, asking questions, why not this, why not that? And then they see another person just come kneel down. But I'm also intrigued, right? So he does not say, help me. He doesn't say God or Lord. He just says, it goes direct to the point, like, my daughter has died, but you come and lay a hand upon her. Like, is that a mark of arrogance, of entitlement, or do you see it like, if he didn't address him as teacher or master or Lord? Because all the other examples, Jesus being addressed in some way, shape, or form. I was wondering, could you kind of parse out the rule of the synagogue, kneeling down
So
and getting.
what's so funny? I didn't see this as so as important as you're saying. I didn't have a focus on this because while in the Roman Empire, bowing down was not the normal way to greet like the emperor. I think that it's just so clear culturally and religiously that bowing down is viewed as a sign of deference. And he's saying, like, oh my God, I'll do anything. I want to recognize you as a person who can do these magical tricks. And we see he was a healer already. So if you have a dying 12-year-old daughter or dead, and you know a person has a bag of tricks that he could go and heal, you'll do whatever you want to show the deference. So I feel like it's accurate what you're saying. He's recognizing Jesus already as an important person. And even though he's an important person, he's recognized Jesus as a more important person, or at least as a miracle worker. But
So,
I
so,
feel,
so,
yeah.
so what he's saying is, in this case, he's using Jesus as an arm. He has a need, to your point, a very desperate need, and to get this need fulfilled, to get life for that situation, I will do whatever I have to do, and even if this means kneeling down before somebody who is not whom I would question or who is not accepted within my Jewish faith. Because as we discussed earlier, Jesus was viewed as in, I like the phrase, but Jesus and John were viewed as in, what do you call it? They were Jewish. They were what's the term?
Sectarians.
Yeah, they were Jewish sectarians, right? Where their views were so divisive, were not accepted, and he doesn't seem like you're saying. What he's saying is he didn't believe in
Well,
him,
I
but
guess
yeah,
maybe a way to put like a summary of what you're saying is that when we see in 9:26 that the report spread throughout the district, we don't see that this ruler or leader of the synagogue jumped on the bandwagon and followed him. I think that's what you're saying, that it's not obvious that he had the greatest intentions. He's just trying to save his daughter, but he maybe wasn't exactly trying to make sure that Jesus is his new leader. And I think
yeah,
that would be an accurate summary.
yeah, which then kind of puts, we didn't talk about 8:19 today, which then puts Jesus' response even more ambiguous, right? So earlier verses we read, like people said, I won't come after you. He'll say, don't come after me, like don't follow me, go to your home, do this, do that. But in this case, to your point, even though the ruler was not, he didn't believe in him, he was using Jesus as an object.
Well,
Jesus
again,
seems
like
to, Jesus seems
you're being
seems
very like tough about it. I'm not sure I would be
Rabbi.
so tough.
Okay, I
But
thought,
yeah, he definitely. But that's normal, right? If you go to the doctor and you're sick with a cancer in your leg or whatever, and then the doctor says, "Here's what you have to do." Are you using the doctor, or are you appreciating his abilities? Like I wouldn't say I'm using the doc, like I'm abusing my relationship with a doctor by asking for healing.
Well, I would push back on that. So in this case, Jesus is not saying, again, Jesus is putting a different philosophy, a different way of life, and he views himself as God, and that's a whole lot more. So I don't think it's just his view. With the doctor, it's more transactional, it's relational, it's just in that one context. I mean, I
Right. This
think,
is transactional.
yeah.
This is like a
So
doctor.
doctor, right? So, which then makes Jesus' response even more surprising. Earlier verses we saw, when people came to him, he will say, "Don't come after me. You go home. Like go do this." Like in 8, right? In 8, when we saw when people came to him, he'll say, like, "You don't come after me. Like go do what you want to go do." Like there was a sense of ambiguity in Jesus' response. The people whom he selected and people he pushed away. But here, this guy comes with
I'm
questionable
not sure that's
intent.
accurate. I'm not sure like he pushed him away. Like I think you're referring to the centurion's
Correct? Yeah.
servant in 8:5 to 8:13. And Jesus says, in 8:7, I will come and cure him. But the centurion said, Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come in my roof. And we'll talk about this a little bit after, but I don't think he ever has an aversion to kind of just like, boop, you're healed. Boop, new car. Boop, I love you.
Yeah, I'll have to look up this verse, right? So, fate of a centurion.
Again, like I give
I
you a
think.
bunch. I'll be honest here. Like I actually did this in advance, so there's three stories I was going to look at, and I guess we could look at it right now, really quickly.
Hmm.
That we have in 8:28, Jesus speaks and gets rid of the demons,
Hmm.
and that in that situation he speaks. He doesn't have to do anything more. That's the Gerasene demons, and then in 8:14 of Peter's mom, he just touched her hand. In 8:16, he cast out the demons, whatever cast out means. And 8:5, we have the centurion, he gives the power to heal. So we see that he is available geographically in all these situations. He actually deals differently with each of them, which I don't know if that's what you're trying to say. Maybe based on someone's faith or based on someone's ability to believe in his mission, he'll deal differently. But he's doing a different verb each time. In our case, he's asked to lay his hand. In 8:28, he speaks. In 8:14, he touches. In 8:16, he casts out. In 8:5, he gives the power to the centurion to heal through faith. So it doesn't seem to me a systemic approach about how he heals. We know the ending is that he heals. Tautologically, this is where we're getting. But the initial steps of how we get it, it sounds like it's almost arbitrary. It's not like Harry Potter, where you have to say that exact phrase and move
Yeah.
the hand with the wand that way, and that's how you get it. It seems that any way could be able to accomplish it. It's just that you have to have either him accomplishing it, Jesus, him casting out the demons, him touching the hand, him laying the hands, or it has to be that you have faith at a certain level, and then almost like Jesus's abilities spread to you because of that. Okay, so it's a great point that you seem very bothered that Jesus would care about this person without the person having faith, but I think that's like the most Christian message ever. So I think it's like a classic Jesus move that you should be one of my disciples. If you're not, that's fine. But the people who don't believe in me, I'm still going to be a giver. I'm still going to help.
So, if you were to just swap out the ruler for the Pharisees, right? And then you can say Jesus saying, I can almost imagine his response saying, like when I read John's response, John the Baptist, right? You brood of vipers. Like he uses such very strong terms when talking to them. And so what he's saying is, even though he was a ruler, he was not a Pharisee. Like it sounds like you make a distinction between a Pharisee and a
I don't
ruler.
have an opinion,
Okay.
because the Pharisees were also like in charge of certain synagogues, and they might have been rulers in certain areas. So I feel that we should take the text for what it says and note that it could have said Pharisee, it could have, but it says either ruler or leader of a synagogue. And so like I think your instinct that it's referring to someone who is a meaningful, significant person is the
Mhm.
point, and not that he's a sectarian or Pharisee or disciple or follower of John, just that he's an important person, and still he bows down, and
Mhm.
still he asks the miracle worker to work the miracle for him because he doesn't have access to another miracle worker. Okay, so let us go on. So the main thing I want to talk about today is, have you ever had hands laid upon you in church? Because obviously certain churches do that and certain
Yes.
churches do not. So tell me
Yes.
about that experience.
Wow. Well, what do you mean by that? It's not. It's not
What happens?
unusual. It's not unusual. People lay hands and they pray, and they believe that. I mean, at churches, people also, if they can't touch them, they would. stretch for the arms. I think it's that gesture of blessing,
Now, are
of
you saying in a post-COVID world, we don't have the ability to bless properly anymore?
yeah, I think I've seen people do both, right? So because if you have one person in the entire congregation and everyone can't come up there to touch him, it's more as the physical gesture of stretching your arm. But then to answer your question, yes, I've had people lay their hands upon me, pray for me. I probably lay their hands like pray. It's more as in a physical gesture of like of
So are you trying to say it's not metaphysical, it's just a nicety? Is that what you
um
mean by physical
I,
gesture?
yeah, I haven't thought about the metaphysical aspects of it. Like, do I think if I stretch my arms, does something happen? I don't think so. I mean,
Well, I mean, like maybe again, like I don't mean to look at it from a magical ritual perspective, but it does seem at least this person, he doesn't say in 9:19, he doesn't say, oh sorry, yeah, in 9:18, he doesn't say heal my daughter. He said, come lay your hand on her and she will live. So he could have, there's a lot of wasted words here. There's a lot of like,
mhm,
come, heal, help me. But it
mhm,
doesn't say that. Yeah, it looks like it wants some ritual to be
mhm,
executed on his daughter in order to save
yeah,
her.
mhm,
And I feel that that ritual that's carried out contemporaneously is
mhm,
something that's meant to mimic that which took place. So if I had to say what is the goal of laying hands in Christianity, and we'll look at the New Testament text in a second, but you have to look at what is the goal. I think you'll be able to make a list, maybe to heal, maybe to give blessing, maybe to
mhm.
show friendship, maybe to show we're on the same team ideologically, philosophically, metaphysically, about the same denominationally. So there's a lot of different reasons I think the one would lay hands. And I think, if anything, if I was a Christian, as you're saying, I would try to figure out like what is this meant to accomplish to the exclusion of something else? Is this meant to heal me? And if it's meant to heal me, should I do it if I'm not broken or sick? If it's meant to show denominational, identity, maybe I should only make sure to do it if I'm an Anglican, when I'm with not with a Baptist, when I'm with Presbyterian, maybe I'm not with a Methodist. I think I'd be more worried about when it's done. If it's just a nicety, then yeah, who cares? Do it
So
when it
I would
happens.
think, yeah, in many ways, it's more a reflection of how this person thinks. Like that's his way of thinking that if you touch my daughter, she will feel well. And so I think it's less about is it object again. It's more a reflection of his mindset and how he's thinking, more of his belief system. I mean, so is it? Do I think something magical happens when people touch them? I don't think so. But I think as human beings, we love touch. As human beings, we love touch, right? And so, like
Yeah. So
when you
again, like, but maybe you
when you
don't think
hug
something
someone,
magical happens.
so when you hug someone, again, it's things like it's a warmth of touch. So
You're
you
being a
know,
very apologist for the post-Kenian worlds. Okay, let's take a step back and let's maybe look and let's look at Luke 4:40. So in Luke 4, you don't have to read the whole verse, like because I just check it out, and it talks about Jesus. He heals people with various illnesses. How? By laying his hands on each of them as the sun setting. So I don't know if the sun setting is important part of that ritual there, but it sounds like the laying hands is a healing thing back in the day, and we see this specifically in Matthew 9:18, we see it in Mark 5:23, we see in Mark 7:32, we see in Mark 8:22. We see that in New Testament, laying hands is for healing. Okay, that's one
fair
thing.
enough, yeah.
When we read a little farther in the New Testament, we see that in Acts, for example, 9:12, we see that there's the idea that you should heal with touch. And Ananias says, lay his hands on Paul 3 days
Hmm.
after Damascus Road encounter to restore his sight. So that again will be a healing. And then Paul's hands become a way for a miracle. So it goes from healing to Acts 14:3 and Acts 19:11 to Paul doing magic and lots of things outside of healing with his hand.
Yeah, but no, so Rabbi, wouldn't you say that's consistent with the biblical narrative?
Oh,
Like,
we'll get to the biblical picture next. Don't worry.
yeah, okay.
So last example from the New Testament, we have 1 Timothy 4:14. Paul charges Timothy uh, as his like official delegate in Ephesus, that says, "Do not neglect the gift you have, which was given you by prophecy, when the counselors and elders lay their hands on you." So now we have giving you. It sounds like not only does it give you a miracle, the ability to do miracles, but you could transfer the ability to do miracles from A to B. And had he not done that metaphysical ritual, that miraculous ritual, then we wouldn't have had Timothy wouldn't have that power. So so let's say, so what you noted is that we should take a step back. So what we're going to do is take a step back and look at the three kinds, or maybe two kinds of what we the Hebrew word is smicha,
Wow.
which smicha is the laying of hands. The Hebrew word is laying hands. I actually saw when I was looking this up early, I saw a Christian interpreter because he wasn't looking at the Hebrew. He said originally laying of hands was a bad thing because if you don't have the Hebrew, it looks the same thing as when you are hitting someone. So originally it was like meant to, like saying don't hit kids, but really tishlach yadcha, send your hand forth, is not the same thing as laying hands. So smicha, the word samach, literally means to lay your hands on. It means to be close to, and it's a word that's in modern Hebrew still means that. And also, like if I am somech on you, I'm relying on you. So it doesn't mean leaning. It doesn't mean laying hands as much as leaning. So in English, it's actually the same thing. If I lay my hand on you, I could lay my hand on you like this, but I'm not leaning. It actually means more than laying hands, but means putting pressure. I laying
Mhm.
myself on you. So if I put my hands on your head, or if I want to heal you on your hand, it's not. I can't just put my hand on you. I have to put my weight on you, or like
So
some minimal
so
amount.
the rabbi, so the next time I see you, you say you're going to lay hands upon me, put pressure and pray for me. That's what he's saying. So, and
I'll give you a handshake. How's that
I'm
sound?
looking now. I'm looking forward to it, Rabbi. I can't wait to be prayed for and be blessed by you.
Okay, so one of the first examples that we see of smicha, of laying hands on, is in Numbers 27:15 to 23, and that is paralleled in Deuteronomy 34:9. And that's when Moses places his hands on Yoshua, on Joshua, before the whole community, and that fills Joshua with the spirit of wisdom. So one kind of smicha, one kind of laying hands, is that I am in charge. I want to make you in charge. I do smicha, I put my hands on top of your head, and I'm either metaphysically or physically conferring power upon you in a way that you didn't have. Moses, because he's about to be dead,
Yeah.
and Joshua was supposed to take over. And in Timothy 1:4-14, when Paul charges Timothy, that is the exact parallel to this example of Numbers 27:15 through 23, in that you have Moses paralleling Paul, Joshua paralleling Timothy, and they're conferring power. What's interesting is that it's not like in the Bible, in the Old Testament,
Can
it
I,
says this.
Rabbi? Can I?
Yeah.
And the same thing with the Jacob, right? When Jacob was dying, he laid his hands on Joseph's sons, and at least the way I read the Bible, it's like the right hand, or he interchanged his hands. Then Joseph will
Right.
say no.
So
It's not just Joshua and Moses, right? But also Jacob, as in
well,
on
there's a
his
bunch
death.
of other examples we could list, but yeah. So
Now,
100%.
so so does the right hand blessing mean more than left hand blessing? Because they're right. I mean, Joseph was so
So
insistent.
the way to properly do smicha in that one situation with Jacob and Joseph, and the right was more important, and that's why it crossed. But in general, you do both hands, so there's no differentiation.
Okay, I cannot
Uh,
wait, Rabbi. When I see you in a few weeks, you're gonna lay both your
well, in
hands with
general, you're
prayer.
also supposed to put your weight down a little bit. So, anyways,
Okay.
so Moses, Paul, if you want to say Jacob and others, it's where Moses does it. It says that Joshua is filled with the spirit of wisdom. It's unclear if that means something magical, metaphysical, or just like he now kind of is filled with the excitement of the day. But the point is that it's a process of handing over authority. So we'll go back to that in a couple moments. Moses also does that in 11:26, where he ordains the 70 elders who then pass on the authority to their successors, et cetera, et cetera. So not only is it getting passed on to the leader, as your example in Jacob, or in my example, Moses or Joshua, but is also getting passed on to a person who has ability to pass on, which is much more similar to 1 Timothy 4:14. Okay, so we see now two examples. We have one passing on to the next leader, and the second example of passing on your authority to other people to hand out the authority. Okay, so that's what we'll call it 1A and 1B. So now two, and the one that shows up the most, I think, in rabbinic sources is smichan on sacrifices. In the temple in Jerusalem, the Beit HaMikdash, a priest would place his hands on the head of an animal sacrifice before offering it. And not only that, an individual, if he did a sin or thought he did a sin, he would also put his hands on the animal. And it's a big argument about what he's trying to accomplish. Most people feel that you're almost vicariously transferring, saying, I deserve to die, but because I'm a person, I'm not going to be killed for doing one sin, you transmit that sin to the animal. And therefore, the sin, you say that the animal shouldn't have to die for this, but God set up a system of blood sacrifices in order to to heal people. So therefore, you make sure to do that. So during, for example, on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, the Kohen Gadol, the high priest would confess on behalf of the whole Jewish people, and he would put his hands on the animal, and then he would say, and the example of what he would say is, for example, I got one example of the confession. This is from the Machzor Vitri. Please, Lord, your people, the house of Israel, have sinned, have done wrong, have rebelled before you. Please, by your name, grant atonement for the sins and the wrongs and the rebellions that you have that they have sinned and done wrong and rebelled before you, your people, the house of Israel, as is written in the Torah of Moses, your servant, the word of your glory. For on this day, namely the Day of Atonement, you will be atoned for and made pure of all your sins for the Lord. So the idea is that if you only lay your hands when you're doing an offering, that wouldn't be enough. You also have to confess either your personal sin or, if it's the high priest, the sins of the whole nation. You may not have to confess like how, how a lot of times Catholics will have to confess the specific sin, but you probably, if you know the specific sin, it would be beneficial to confess that sin. But in general, you just have to confess, saying, I sinned, I did wrong. And it seems if you do the laying hands, the smicha, without the confession, you're kind of missing an integral element. Okay, so that's the biblical picture. We have 1A, 1B, Moses to Joshua, 1A, 1B, Moses ordains the 70 elders, 1B. 2, the sacrifices with a confession would get the laying of hands. So if we stopped right here, it's unclear what Christianity what the New Testament is talking about then. If I only said that there's this laying of hands and we have 1A, 1B, and 2, then I would say what I saw in 1 Timothy 4:14 makes perfect sense. That seems to be an example of 1B, of just like Moses gives out the authority to the elders in order to pass that on, whatever their power is. That seems to be what Paul is charging Timothy with. But if I stop right here and look at 1B, 1A, 1B, and 2, and I said the power to heal, the power to do miracles. Well, we know, for example, I'll just give you, when Moses raises his hands and the Israelites are victorious and he drops his hands, that's kind of like a ritual, a magical thing. So if Jesus said, every single time I raise my hands, like in the stance of a touchdown, that everyone would get healed, I think that makes sense. But if we stop right now, it's unclear where Christianity gets this laying of hands is the miraculous way to heal people. If anything, you do laying of hands before you kill animals. So I just want to note that almost difficult matter to try to understand. Okay, so what we're going to do is try to understand this a little bit more deeply. So we went through a bunch of examples in the New Testament. We went through a bunch of examples in the Bible. What I want to do now is point out that rabbinic literature uses it in 2 different ways, and it parallels 1B and 2. But I think this will help us open the bridge to understand what's happening in the New Testament. So very famously, the Mishnah in Menachot 9:7 says, all offerings of the community do not require laying of the hands except the bull that is offered for the transgression of any commandments and the scapegoat. But any individual offering has to have, you have to still do the ordination. So we see in rabbinic literature, ordination still means laying your hands on an animal. But one thing that you may not know is that the way to say that someone is ordained today as a rabbi is called smicha, is called laying hands. And we see this in the Christian examples as well. We see Anglicans and other groups of Christians that they will say the way that you get ordained, if you watch an ordination process of various priests, they will also lay hands. So that idea of laying hands parallels our 1A, namely Moses, viewed as our first rabbi, ordains Joshua as another rabbi. So too, Jews today will ordain rabbis. They won't lay their hands anymore because that seems to be the literal interpretation. They'll just say you pass all the tests, while most Christian denominations will still many will still lay hands in order to show that the priest has been ordained. So the reason we see this is that in the Mishnah Hagiga 2:2, it says that there were many generations of people who would lay their hands on an animal and wouldn't, until finally it was decided that we would lay our hands on animals on certain holidays, and other opinion says we wouldn't. But we see is that these people were represented as what we would call the tradition. And eventually it becomes an idea that the tradition is passed on, by rabbi, by person to person. And that idea is called smicha, is called laying hands, even if you personally don't lay hands. So we have now almost like this, I would call it where we had 1A, 1B. Under 1A, where Moses ordains Joshua's successor, we have this idea that rabbis will be ordained generation to generation by having this ordination process, very similar to this idea that we see in Christianity, where they will also be. So what we have now is an ordination process where people are given the power to represent the religion. So when we look at Christianity now, when we look at our verse specifically, I want to note two things. Number one, does Jesus ever lay his hands on the person? Or does Jesus ever say he's going to lay his hands on the person? So if you look at 9:18, it says, "My daughter has just died, but come and lay your hand on her and she will live." So is this Jesus' idea? Or is this the leader of the synagogue or the ruler's idea?
This
So,
idea, it's not
and now I
Jesus' idea.
want you to skip a couple of verses and see what Jesus actually does. If you look at 9:23, when Jesus came to the leader's house and saw the flute players in the crowd making commotion, he said in 9:24, "Go away, for the girl is not dead but sleeping." And they laughed at him. When the crowd had been put outside, he went in and took her by the hand.
Hmm.
Doesn't say he laid his hands. I just said he held her hand and the girl got up. So the way, at least the way I read this, is that he never did the ritual of laying hands. It seems to me that the people at that time period assumed laying hands in the sense that Moses ordained Joshua and the spirit of wisdom went into him, and the sense that if you ordain a rabbi, he has the authority to rule, that it's viewed as laying, if you could lay your hands on something, it's showing that you have authority. It's showing that you can rule over. So I think Jesus, in your favorite subversive way, does a really interesting thing here. He does accept that he has the authority, but he doesn't accept that the authority comes with the way laying of hands and the way that other people in that generation would do things. The idea of ordination existed, many years before Jesus, and it was already very heavily discussed in his time period. And that was viewed as the way to have authority. So it makes sense that the ruler or the leader of the synagogue would come and say, if you have authority, you should lay hands. That's what we saw of Moses. That's what we see of the Pharisees. The way that you show authority is that you lay hands. But Jesus said, I'm actually going to do a really new thing. I'm going to lay hands in the way that we see in the Bible for number two, the Smicha of sacrifices. Remember, so 1A was Moses to Joshua, 1B was Moses to the elders, but two was that we see that they were still doing in Jesus' time this idea of putting your hands on the animal. And what did Jesus' hands on the animal? What did you do with those hands on the animal? You did a confession. The idea of confession for Jesus is like this bringing in a faith, showing that you are kind of jumping teams. So Jesus wanted to show you that he wasn't willing to do laying of hands in the old way to show authority. He was
Hmm.
willing to do it when someone was able to show faith and confess. And what we see, as I mentioned before, what we see in the centurion servant is that the only thing that you really need to heal was faith, according to Jesus. So when he touched the girl's hand, in this situation, you're right. The father's faith was not shown, but they were still, this was based on, we see two ways that Jesus could carry out things. One, he could give you the authority to carry it out, like the centurion servants. Or number two, he could be there himself and carry out the miracle. So it could be, like you said, that the leader of the synagogue didn't really have faith in the situation. He just was a transaction that wanted, like he was using Jesus as a doctor. And therefore, Jesus could not tell him, I'm going to just go back and have faith, because I don't think the person did have faith. So Jesus, though, was able to come and say, based on my authority, that I won't do a laying of hands. I just have to touch her hand. I just have to be here because my faith is enough to heal.
Yeah, and I think in this case he was not doing the father a favor. He was more helping in some ways because he was saving this girl. He was giving life to this girl not because he had not because he was that he liked the father or what the father did, but more out of his compassion. But that's kind of more to come next week to follow. But I think I like the way you say this thing where he was taking subversive as I'm not going to lay my hands upon you, but I'm going to touch you because as you said, the father didn't have faith, or he did not express. Even if he had faith, he did not express this in ways that would be tangible, that are more consistent or clear. That's interesting. Thank you.
Yeah, so it's really interesting because when you see the way that it plays out, let's say in the Catholic Church, as being, one of the sacraments of the Catholic Church, that you almost still have this literalism of using the hands, but it seems that Jesus' main purpose, and I think the way that it says it accurately in Timothy, the laying of the hands is more a metaphor for passing on authority, and that is literally the way it was used in the first century, in first century BCE and
Yeah.
second century. That it's not the laying of the hands literally that gives you authority. It's when you lay hands, it's symbolically showing that this person is part of the ideology and part of the team, and therefore could go and carry out the miracles in the sense that Paul is able to do that with Timothy.
But Rabbi, so if you were to just sit with this for a moment, right? Like this is like it's a very audacious claim. My daughter is dead. You lay my hand and she will live again. Like dead people don't come back to life again.
Well,
That is,
first of all, as I mentioned in Mark and Luke, she's not dead. But if you look at Eliyahu Hanavi, Elijah the prophet, he does bring this is what we'll talk about next week.
yeah, okay.
Definitely.
So yeah, that's
So,
what I.
so the answer
But
is if you're a good Christian, dead people do come back to life.
so okay, this is not about this is about a Jewish leader, a ruler who is saying
But they all
uh,
believed in resurrection.
they in this life. I mean, resurrection in this life. Okay, well that's
They are definitely one of the cardinal beliefs at this time. Anyone who is messianic would have believed in some form of resurrection. They went hand in hand. I know today it feels easily to believe in a messianic era independent of resurrection, but in that time period, they would have been the same thing almost. People during a messianic era, we
so,
have
Rabbi. So
resurrection.
in a way, what he's saying is it's kind of what we think and what we ask from that thinking. Things can change because this person believed that resurrection can is possible. He asked for resurrection, and so his daughter came back to life again. But if he didn't think this is possible, then he might not have asked for this. If he might have
Well,
asked for
I mean,
this,
I guess like I wouldn't say as strongly as you. I'd say she just died. I feel that, especially in the olden days, in certain, I mentioned this to you earlier, that sometimes certain cultures don't even allow you to bury the body for a couple of days because you don't want the person to wake up inside of a coffin. And sometimes, especially in the olden days, it was more complicated in order to know that someone was dead. So, they would do the feather test to show your breathing, but sometimes it was just very, very difficult. And they definitely would once in a while bury alive people by accident.
Mhm.
Okay, Isaac, call it a day
Okay,
on that.
well, Rabbi, on that note, it's great learning. Well, I can't wait when I meet you in person for you to lay your hands upon me, put pressure, and bless me. I'm looking,
Seems
look,
unlikely, but
yeah,
yes.
looking forward to it. Again,
Okay,
thanks, Rabbi.
no problem.
Thank you.